Welcome back to the Deep Dive. You know we love to unpack crucial chapters of Indian history, and today we're zeroing in on a really significant one,
Absolutely.
the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857. It's often called the First War of Indian Independence, and for anyone interested in understanding India's journey, it's, well, essential.
It really is.
And for all you new UPSC aspirants out there, especially those tackling GS1 Modern Indian History, this deep dive is for you.
Definitely need to know this one inside and out.
So hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more deep dives like this, and oh yeah, click the bell icon to stay updated on all our new releases.
I want to miss those.
All right, so let's transport ourselves back to 1857.
Yeah.
Imagine India as like a pressure cooker simmering on a stove, with the heat just building up inside.
Oh, that's a good analogy. It perfectly captures the atmosphere in British India in the years leading up to the rebellion.
Right. It wasn't just one single event. It was this like culmination of years of mounting pressure.
Multiple factors, yeah. Political, economic, social, administrative, all simmering away under British rule.
Okay, so let's break down this pressure cooker, shall we? What were the key ingredients, the things that really led to this explosion?
Well, a lot of our sources point to the doctrine of lapse as a major political trigger.
Doctrine of lapse. Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you break that down a bit?
Sure. So the doctrine of lapse was this policy that allowed the British East India Company to annex kingdoms if a ruler died without a male heir.
Ah, I see. Convenient. Right.
Very convenient. It was often used as an excuse to, well, expand their control. So you can imagine you're a ruler of a princely state, and suddenly your right to rule is questioned just because of this technicality.
Right, because you don't have a son.
Exactly. It was a huge blow to their sovereignty, and it created so much resentment among the ruling class.
Okay, so the doctrine of lapse essentially stripped Indian rulers of their autonomy and made them, what, pawns in this British game of empire building?
Precisely. And it wasn't just some political power play either. It had real consequences for the people living in these annexed kingdoms.
Yeah, I bet. Like, how did people's lives actually change?
Well, think about the upheaval caused by the annexation of places like Satara, Jhansi, and Awadh. It led to economic hardship, social unrest. Existing power structures were totally disrupted.
Wow, so the British were basically creating their own opposition, pushing these people to the brink.
In a way, yes. And many of these deposed rulers and their subjects, they ended up serving as sepoys in the very army that would later rebel.
Talk about adding fuel to the fire.
Right.
But it wasn't just political, was it? Our sources also highlight this, like, crippling impact of British economic policies on India.
Oh, absolutely. The economic exploitation was a major pressure point. Basically, they turned India into a supplier of raw materials and a captive market for their own manufactured goods.
Right, so they could get cheap materials and then sell their finished products back to India at a higher price.
Exactly. So imagine you're a skilled artisan, known for your craftsmanship, but suddenly your livelihood is snatched away.
Because cheap, mass-produced goods from Britain flood the market.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened, led to the decline of traditional Indian industries, widespread unemployment. A lot of Indians felt very vulnerable and exploited.
You've got a population struggling to make ends meet, and then on top of that, you have these British land revenue policies adding even more pressure.
Oh, definitely.
I know our sources mentioned systems like the permanent settlement and the riot-wary system. Can you unpack those a little bit?
Well, these systems, while different in how they were implemented, they basically transformed land into a commodity. And it led to the rise of absentee landlords and moneylenders.
Okay, and how did that affect the average farmer?
Well, they were already struggling, and then they were burdened with these heavy taxes. Often, they would end up losing their land.
Pushing them further into poverty. So we've got political disenfranchisement, economic turmoil, and as if that wasn't enough, let's throw some social and religious tensions into the mix.
Right, because it wasn't exactly a cultural exchange program, was it?
No, definitely not. It's like the British, despite their claims of bringing progress and civilization to India, they often just disregarded Indian customs and traditions.
Completely. Imposed their own social norms, and they often treated Indians, even the elite, with this sense of superiority.
And disdain.
Yeah.
It's like they were deliberately trying to create a divide, just to emphasize their position of power.
And then, of course, you have the religious dimension. The British, even though they claimed neutrality, they were often seen as trying to undermine Hinduism and Islam.
Right, and there were even rumors of forced conversions.
There were, and those fears of British interference in religious practices just added to the resentment that was already building.
So all these factors, political, economic, social, and religious, they're all simmering beneath the surface.
Yeah, like a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
It's almost like the British were setting the stage for an explosion without even realizing it.
And then enter the infamous greased cartridges.
Right, the grease cartridges. Tell us about those.
Well, the British introduced the Enfield rifle, and these rifles used cartridges that soldiers had to bite off the end before loading them.
Okay.
And rumors quickly spread that the grease used on these cartridges was derived from animal fat.
Specifically cow and pig fat, which was a huge issue for both Hindu and Muslim sepoys.
Exactly. I mean, for Hindus, the cow is sacred, and for Muslims, consuming pork is forbidden. So the use of animal fat, whether true or not, was seen as a deliberate attempt to defile their religions.
To force them to compromise their faith.
Yes, and you have to remember, all these other pressures were already building up. This incident with the cartridges, it just became the tipping point.
Okay, so this is where Mangal Pandey enters the picture, right?
Yes, he was a sepoy in Barrackpore, and he became a symbol of resistance against these greased cartridges.
I've heard his name. What did he do?
He openly defied his British officers, attacked them in protest.
Wow. It must have taken so much courage to do that. He must have known the consequences would be severe.
He did. He was court-martialed and executed.
But his act of defiance, I mean, that really resonated with the sepoys.
It did. It became a rallying cry for the rebellion.
So you've got the stage set, political resentment, economic hardship, social tensions, religious anxieties, and now you've got a martyr in Mangal Pandey.
The pressure cooker is about to blow.
What happens next?
Well, the tension finally snaps in Meerut. On May 10th, 1857, 85 sepoys refuse to use the new cartridges. They are court-martialed, imprisoned, and publicly humiliated.
That was the final straw.
It was.
And that's when the rebellion really erupts, right?
Yeah.
Sepoys rise up, they free their imprisoned comrades, and they march towards Delhi.
Exactly. But it wasn't just the sepoys. Civilians, fueled by their own grievances, they joined the uprising. It became this powerful expression of widespread discontent against British rule.
So the rebellion is on the move.
Yeah.
They reach Delhi.
And they declare the aging Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, as the symbolic leader of the revolt.
Wow. So they essentially reinstated the Mughal emperor.
They did. It was a strategic move to legitimize their struggle, to evoke the memory of a pre-colonial past and unite Indians under a common banner.
What a powerful statement. And the rebellion spread quickly from there, right? Throughout northern India.
It did. The revolt swept through major cities like Kanpur, Lucknow, and Jhansi.
What's really interesting is that there was this unity demonstrated between Hindus and Muslims during this phase of the rebellion.
Absolutely.
For instance, our sources mention the ban on cow slaughter in rebel-held areas.
Yeah, a real sign of unity. It seems like the rebellion, while challenging British rule, was also forging a new sense of Indian identity.
It was a really complex event, and its impact would be felt for generations to come. But before we get into all of that, I think it's important to understand the individuals who led this rebellion.
Yes, absolutely. We've talked about Bahadur Shah Zafar and Mangal Pandey, but there were so many others who played key roles.
Each with their own motivations and their own contributions to the rebellion.
Exactly. So we have all these incredible leaders emerging from different parts of the country, right?
It really speaks to the widespread nature of the rebellion.
It does, but as we know, the rebellion was ultimately suppressed. And that begs the question, why? Why, despite its initial momentum and widespread participation, did it fail?
Right. Because you look at it and you see these incredible acts of courage, this solidarity. But it makes you wonder, what were those key factors that ultimately led to its downfall?
Well, I think one crucial factor was a lack of a unified vision and a really centralized leadership. The rebels, yes, they shared that common goal of ousting the British, but there wasn't a clear plan for what a post-British India would even look like.
So it was more of a reaction to British rule rather than a proactive movement with a well-defined roadmap for the future.
Exactly. They were united in their opposition, but they had different ideas about what should replace British rule. Some wanted to restore the Mughal Empire, others wanted independent kingdoms, and some envisioned a more modern democratic system.
I see. It's like trying to build a house without a blueprint. All these different ideas about what it should look like, but no real plan to get there.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you had these internal divisions within Indian society itself. Not all sepoys or rulers joined the rebellion. Some stayed loyal to the British.
I guess for different reasons, right? Fear, self-interest, maybe some genuinely believed in the benefits of British rule,
Right, all of those things. And the British, they were able to exploit those existing divisions.
using their classic divide-and-rule policy.
Yeah, which they had been using effectively for years. It continued to play a role during the rebellion. They were able to pit different groups against each other.
And it wasn't just internal divisions either, right? The rebellion also faced limitations in terms of geographical reach.
That's another crucial point. The rebellion was mostly confined to northern and central India. The south, it remained relatively peaceful.
And what about the Sikhs?
The Sikhs had their own, well, complex relationship with the British and mostly stayed neutral.
So a lack of pan-Indian unity played a significant role in the rebellion's failure.
Absolutely. It allowed the British to isolate the rebellion and concentrate their forces.
I see.
And then, of course, we can't forget about the military superiority of the British.
Right. That was always going to be a challenge.
They had better weapons, communication networks, a more organized military structure.
The rebels, on the other hand, they often relied on outdated tactics and lacked the coordination needed for a sustained campaign.
It's like a classic David and Goliath scenario.
Even though it was eventually suppressed, it's clear that the rebellion had a lasting impact on the course of Indian history. What would you say were some of the key consequences?
Well, for the British, it was a major wake-up call. Like, the pressure cooker had exploded. They couldn't just ignore it anymore. One of the most immediate changes was the reorganization of the army.
Okay, so how did the rebellion change British military strategy in India?
Well, they realized they couldn't rely so heavily on Indian sepoys. They needed a more robust European military presence, so they increased the number of British troops in India.
Makes sense. Can't rely on the same people who just revolted against you.
Right, and they strategically positioned them in a way that could help prevent future uprisings.
I guess that's kind of like tightening the lid on the pressure cooker.
Exactly. And they also realized the flaws in their divide and conquer strategy within the army.
Right, because their old tactic backfired. They thought that by mixing soldiers from different regions, castes, and religions, they could prevent solidarity. But the rebellion proved them wrong.
They learned that shared grievances could transcend those differences. And so, after the rebellion, they reorganized the army to segregate soldiers along religious and ethnic lines.
Hoping to prevent the kind of unity that fueled the uprising. But it's ironic, isn't it? Instead of addressing those root causes of discontent, they just doubled down on manipulating and exploiting existing social divisions.
Unfortunately, that's what they did. And that approach, well, it contributed to communal tensions that continued to plague India even after independence.
A pretty tragic legacy. But the rebellion's impact went beyond just the military. It led to changes in the whole political structure of British rule in India.
Oh, absolutely. It really shook the foundations of the East India Company's power. And the British Crown realized that the company, with its focus on profit and expansion, just wasn't equipped to govern a colony as vast and complex as India.
So the era of company rule came to an end.
It did. In 1858, control of India was formally transferred from the East India Company to the British Crown. Queen Victoria became the Empress of India, and they put this whole new bureaucratic system in place to administer the colony directly.
A major shift in power. But did this new system address any of those underlying issues that had led to the rebellion in the first place?
Well, the Crown definitely tried to project this image of benevolent paternalism, but their policies, in reality, were still driven by imperial interests and a desire to maintain control. However, the rebellion did force them to rethink their approach to the princely states.
Right, the princely states, those semi-autonomous kingdoms that were like coexisting with British India. How did the rebellion change their policy toward them?
The rebellion showed them the danger of antagonizing the rulers of those states. They realized that a united front, even if it was made up of different elements, could be a serious threat to their rule. So they abandoned the doctrine of lapse.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and they adopted a more conciliatory approach toward the princes.
So a combination of carrot and stick, offering concessions to keep the princes on their side while still holding the ultimate power.
Exactly. It was all about maintaining stability and preventing any future alliances between disgruntled princes and potential rebels. The rebellion taught them that the stability of their rule depended on managing these complex relationships very, very carefully.
It's fascinating to see how this single event, this eruption of discontent, forced the British to completely reassess their whole approach to India, their military, their administration, their policies towards the princely states. It's clear that the Sepoy Rebellion, even though it didn't succeed in its immediate goals, it really did leave an indelible mark on the course of Indian history. What do you think are some of the most important lessons that we can learn from studying the Sepoy Rebellion?
It's a great question. I mean, the rebellion itself didn't lead to immediate independence for India, but it definitely set in motion a chain of events that would ultimately lead to that outcome.
Right, like things could never really go back to how they were before.
Exactly. Think of it like a pressure valve being released. The rebellion might have been suppressed, but that pressure for change, for self-rule, it just kept building.
So the Sepoy Rebellion, it wasn't just a historical event, it was a catalyst for change. It forced the British to adapt, but it also planted those seeds for India's future independence. What do you think, what are some of the biggest lessons we can learn from studying the Sepoy Rebellion?
Well, one thing it really highlights is the importance of unity in any struggle for freedom. And of course, strong leadership.
It's interesting, right, because the rebellion ultimately was hampered by those internal divisions and that lack of centralized leadership.
Right. Having a shared grievance is powerful, but it's not enough on its own. A successful movement needs a clear vision, a cohesive strategy, and strong leadership to actually guide it.
It's like that old saying, united we stand, divided we fall. The rebellion also, I think, underscores the importance of understanding and addressing the root causes of discontent. The British, they were so focused on suppressing symptoms instead of tackling those underlying issues. Political disenfranchisement, economic exploitation, all those social and religious tensions.
And suppressing dissent only works for so long. Sooner or later, those underlying pressures will find a way to erupt. And it's not always pretty.
It's a good point. We also see, through the Sepoy Rebellion, the power of shared narratives and symbols. The rebels were able to rally people from so many different backgrounds by appealing to that shared sense of identity.
Absolutely. Whether it was through the symbolism of the Mughal emperor, the defense of their religious beliefs, or even just that desire for a return to a pre-colonial past.
Right, those symbols and narratives can be incredibly powerful tools for mobilizing people.
They give people a sense of purpose, a common ground on which to unite and work toward a shared goal.
It's fascinating, right, to see how those themes, unity, leadership, addressing root causes, and the power of narratives, those are all still relevant today.
Oh, they are, not just in India, but around the world. History helps us understand the forces that have shaped the world, It helps us navigate the present and shape the future.
Well said. And with that, I think we've officially squeezed every last drop of insight out of this topic. A huge thank you to you, our expert guide, for taking us on this deep dive into the Sepoy Rebellion of 1857.
It's been my pleasure. Always a delight to dive into these historical turning points.
And for all you UPSC aspirants out there, we hope this deep dive has given you a solid foundation for tackling those GS1 Modern Indian History questions. Best of luck with your exams.
And for everyone else, just remember to keep exploring, keep questioning, keep learning. Because as we've seen today, the more we understand our past, the better equipped we are to handle the present and build the future.
So well said. And before we wrap up, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our future deep dives. Until next time, keep diving deep.